Hello, can everyone hear me? Yep. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's a real honour to be invited so far away to talk about something that's so close to my heart. And I think I didn't realise how international the story was until I came here and seeing the film yesterday and then hearing the talks this morning and seeing Bishop Daly talking about my Uncle Jackie on that bit of news footage, that I'm normally quite hardened to things like that. But while I'm here, it's really affecting. So I think it is just realising how much it affected other people and maybe how much it still matters today. So thank you for the opportunity for coming anyway. Where do I start? I'll probably start with my family story. My family were the Duddies, and they lived in Craigan, which would be a predominantly Catholic part of the city. And there was 15 children in my mum's family. 15, but it was quite common in Derry at the time to have loads of children. And their mum had just died in 1968 of leukemia and left 15 children. We know mum. And then Jackie was killed then in 1972. So it really devastated the family in a way that I'll never really understand. But I can sort of, because of my mum's experiences, that's what sort of got me into this kind of work. So my mum wouldn't have been a very vocal person. She kept to herself. But my Auntie Kay, who lived next door, she was the family campaigner and told me all her stories and stuff. And that's kind of how I got the bug of wanting to help in any way that I could. So from an early age, we didn't really know much about what happened on Bloody Sunday. We were quite sheltered from it. And, we were actively discouraged from ever discussing politics or religion, especially with alcohol. You just don't talk about these things. It's still a rule in our house, no politics or religion. And we were brought up very non-political and, basically we were quite sheltered, I think, in hindsight. And I wasn't allowed to go up the town whenever there was like the annual apprentice boys marches, the unionist parades through the city and stuff. That was all really antagonistic when I was young, and we weren't allowed out of the house. And still now, we would have to tell my mum if we were in town when the apprentice boys were marching. And I wasn't allowed to go on Bloody Sunday marches or things like that. Just, it's the fear of the unknown, I think, in my mum's case. She just didn't want her children being in the firing line if it ever happened again. So I can understand that now in hindsight, because I'm a mum myself. But at the time, I thought we were quite sheltered and locked in sometimes, you're not going, end of story. So I never went on my first Bloody Sunday march until I was 27 or something. And even then it was petrifying to me because it was just people, and I wasn't used to crowds. So, and my mum would still have a problem with the crowds kind of thing, and she wasn't on the march. But again, it's the fear of the unknown. So my 3 uncles were on the march, and Jackie was he the youngest? No, he was the middle boy that was on the march, and they were warned not to go. And my Uncle Jerry, the other campaigner in the family, he distracted my granddad to get Jackie out of the house to go on the march. And they knew they would be in big trouble if they were caught, kind of. And the older brother met them down the town and said, "You better get home, my daddy's going to kill you, But they disobeyed him because everybody was out that day. And it wasn't just like boys and men, it was family. It was a family day out. And that really comes across in all the work I do, was that it was like an almost carnival atmosphere. It was a real camaraderie to the day. They really thought they were going to achieve change. And nobody saw it coming. The week before Bloody Sunday, there was a civil rights march on a beach locally, and it was across a beach, and they picked a beach so there was no stones and stuff, and there wouldn't be much of a big fight. And the beach led to an internment camp locally, but the paras were drafted in. They police McGilligan Beach. It's called McGilligan, so if you look it up, it's really well documented, and so that should have been a warning, really, to the people of Derry not to mess with the paras. They beat the marchers mercilessly. There was barbed wire across the beach, but the paras actually just came around the barbed wire and just started beating everybody. And I've interviewed a lot of people over the years that were there at McGilligan, and they talk about, rubber bullets that, rubber bullets were like this size, big, massive rubber bullets. And they would slice the top of the rubber bullet and put glass in or razor blades in, just to give them that much more punch when they shot them at civilians. And so that has borne out in other interviews. So that's an actual fact. And then we met a soldier in the museum once, and he said, yeah, we did used to do that. Crazy, and that's before they started firing live weapons. So from McGilligan then, there was a fear kind of the Paras, I think. And they also knew what they'd done in Ballymurphy 6 months earlier in Belfast. The day that internment was introduced, the Paras were policing a Catholic part of West Belfast, Ballymurphy, and it's just like a normal housing estate. But over the course of 3 days, they killed 11 people. 10 of them were shot, including a mum who was shot in the face and left to die in a field, and a priest who was waving a hanky. And the 11th man to die, he wasn't even shot. A para came up to him and said, bang, and pretended to shoot him in the street, and he dropped dead of a heart attack. So that's the 11th on Ballymurphy. So the Ballymurphy families, while we're talking about it, they only got and there was no police investigation, nothing. It was just brushed under the carpet. And they only had an inquest 2 years ago, 48 years after their loved ones died. And, that's an example of how slowly the law works in the North. They had to fight for everything. And they got an inquest where we got an inquiry. But again, it just stops there. It doesn't go any higher. So whenever we talk about Bloody Sunday, we should be mindful that it's not just about Bloody Sunday. There are scores of similar cases across the North on all sides of the community, paramilitary killings and all too. The people just need answers or accountability or transparency or, just for the rule of law to apply where it would anywhere else. On the day of Bloody Sunday, my mum and all, they were in the house. The girls didn't really go on the march, but they would have went down to the riots to see all the good-looking men rioting and things like that. My mum always told stories about meeting her friends at the riots because there was loads of talent. And I think I can sort of identify. I would have been there too if I was there with all the long-haired boys and all. And it wasn't. I think one of my aunties remembers it being on the radio that there was trouble down the town and that they were carrying a young man through Chamberlain Street, but she didn't know at the time that it was Jackie they were talking about. And that's the famous footage of Jackie being carried down a real tiny street. And it wasn't until sort of later that it transpired that Jackie was among the dead. And my Auntie Kay, again, she was only 25 at the time, and we'd heard rumours that they heard rumours that Jackie was shot, and she phoned the hospital and they said, Jackie Duddy, dead on admission, and put the phone down. And that's how Kay found out. So again, how cruel is that? There was no compassion about these things. And I think that hurt people more even. And we didn't find out for a few days, I think, what happened to him. That they found out then that he was running beside Bishop Daly, Father Daly then. And Bishop Daly always remembered that Jackie kind of giggled almost at the sight of a priest running in a riot, so that he remembered him sort of giggling and then falling forward. And he just thought he was shot by a rubber bullet, but when he went back, he was pouring my blood. And that's when the white hanky artefact, I suppose, came into play. It was all Bishop Daly had on him to try and stop the flow of blood. And I put it in Jackie's shirt when Jackie was going to the hospital. And it accidentally came back to our family with Jackie's belongings from the hospital. And my granddad burnt all Jackie's clothes a long time ago, but he kept the hanky. And so it sort of passed down through the generations. And now it's in the Museum of Free Derry for safekeeping. And there was a good story behind that too. My Auntie Kay kept the hanky in her handbag for 40 years until she was almost mugged outside our street. And she held on to her bag for dear life. And the mugger ran away. And after that we says, hand it over to the museum, because that guy wouldn't have known the significance of this small piece of cotton, he would have just thrown it in the bin. So after that, we got her and Bishop Daly up to the museum and a handover, and that's where it is for safekeeping. And I'm really proud as well to say that she recently passed on the custodianship of the hanky to me. So now it passes down through me. So even though it's an artefact in the museum, it still belongs to our house. And that's a real privilege, a strange legacy. What else? Bear with me, I've got some really untidy notes. So some more things about the day that I wanted to talk about. I don't know how many of you were here for the Sunday screening yesterday, but there's some things about the day that really stand out in my head. Like, you could see it in the film yesterday, Jim Ray, who was shot twice. He was shot and wounded And while he was lying there paralysed, they shot him again to make sure he was dead. So he was the only clear-cut case of execution on the day. And the one prosecution decision we got was about that area and about Jim Ray specifically. Was a really... And you can see him in the Sunday film sitting. There's a famous photo of it. And it's the breakaway riot when all the young men were throwing stones. And there's one man sitting on the ground. And he's got the mask on and he's just sitting there. And it's a real powerful photograph. And that's Jim Ray. And he's the one man sitting. And he was shot in the back twice a few minutes later. So I always thought that photo spoke volumes for what happened on Bloody Sunday. And there's another photo of Jim Ray too. And he's carrying the civil rights banner. Him and another guy. And both of the guys were shot. The other guy survived. And over the years, I've just interviewed so many people to do with it that I know all the different angles and all the different... Although the new book, I've had a bit of criticism that I didn't interview enough soldiers or enough Protestants, but you can never please everybody, you know. About Jackie on the day, my Auntie Kay always says they murdered him twice. They murdered him in the street, and then they murdered his good name. And I think that stands for a lot of the families, you know, that if they had have apologised there and then, and they really thought that Lord Widgery was going to, you know, don't worry, Widgery's going to sort it out. You know, it was wrong and he'll say so, but it was an absolute travesty. And so they murdered their bad name too, their good name. And so the families and the wounded, and generally anyone associated with Bloody Sunday was sort of tarred with this brush of, you know, you must be troublemakers, you must be terrorist families, you know, just generally. They were harassed and tormented for years afterwards. And even, like, my mum and dad now hated going to airports because they would get pulled aside for, like, 8 hours at a time. My daddy ended up not going to England anymore because he would get pulled. And I said it was because he looked like an IRA man, and he really did, you know. He had that sort of shifty look about him. And a big moustache, a big 70s moustache. But my daddy couldn't go anywhere because, just, oh, you're married to a dotty? Right, okay. But that was across the board. Like, the wounded couldn't travel anywhere. They were absolutely tormented by the army and the police. And the houses were raided and stuff regularly. I remember our house being raided when we were young too. And like, an army raid is a really scary thing. And it's like 6 a.m. and they all come in and wake you up. And it must have been when I was old enough, because I remember that worrying that the soldier was going to read my diary. And I started a diary when I was 14. So it must have been when I was 14. And my Auntie Kay remembers as well, in the family home where my granddad lived next door. And she said there was a raid on there a few years earlier. And the thing was, you had to follow the soldiers around the house because they would plant something. They would try and make you look bad. So whoever owned the house followed them into every room. And a member of NICRA was also allowed to, you know, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. They were also allowed to accompany the army on raids. So there was sort of like an objective person there that could keep an eye and report back if the army behaved badly. But my Auntie Kay went upstairs and she saw a young soldier in the bathroom in Moss Park where we live. And the soldier was just doing this, you know, shaking his leg. And you could see the gun coming out the bottom of his trouser leg. And my Auntie Kay just screamed, "No, he's trying to plant a gun, he's trying to plant a gun." And the young soldier ran out and the raid was over and the army disappeared. But I didn't know that story until like a couple of years ago. And probably every family has stories like that. Isn't it frightening though? Yeah, and if there had been a gun in that house, all my uncles would have been arrested and they would all be in jail for absolutely no reason. So there was a general sense of harassment and intimidation that went on for decades. And the wounded, particularly, would still suffer that harassment, I think. You know, if they feel harassed, their entire life has been, because they're still living. The few wounded that we do have left, it affected their whole life. You know, they were viewed with mistrust and suspicion everywhere they went. So part of the Bloody Sunday thing was not only proving that Derry was telling the truth, that the army came on firing and shot civilians in the back, but also that they didn't deserve it, and it wasn't an IRA gun battle. The only person on the day that was slightly involved in anything IRA related was Jared Donaghy, but he wasn't in the IRA, he was in the youth Republican wing. And just because of that association with a Republican wing, they planted nail bombs on his body, and when his dead body turned up, it took him 2.5 hours to get to hospital, by the way, when everyone else was already in the morgue or in hospital. Gerard Donaghy's body went missing for hours. And it wasn't until later that night it turned up with nail bombs in every pocket. And I think I mentioned it yesterday too, that he was wearing those really tight Wrangler outfits, really tight denims. And it was so tight that he couldn't get his cigarettes into his pocket and he had to carry them in his hand. And yet 4 nail bombs. Well, there was a massive nail bomb in every pocket when his body turned up later. And Lord Savile didn't remove that stain from his name. They said he was innocent, but he probably had nail bombs in his pockets the whole time. So again, that's another real travesty of Bloody Sunday, was you couldn't just announce that they were all innocent. You had to use somebody as a scapegoat. And so whenever we talk about Bloody Sunday, we always mention the case of Gerard Donaghy, who was declared innocent, but they still left that stain on his reputation that broke his family's heart. On the day as well, there was one soldier shot on Bloody Sunday. He shot himself in the foot at about 5 o'clock that day accidentally. And that's the one soldier that was killed. And I heard that anecdotally over the years, but then when you're looking through the report, and it's true, it sort of shows that there was absolutely nothing going in their direction. There was no gun battle, as it was claimed. And you saw it again in the Sunday film yesterday. Bubbles, the first boy shot, he was in the hospital. He went and attacked the soldier who was shot in the foot, and you could hear it in the film. You shot yourself in the foot and you were the only one hurt. And that doesn't really get talked about much. The soldiers also said that they were hit by nail bombs, petrol bombs, acid bombs from the flats. None of these things happened because no one was expecting them to go into Free Derry. It was a no-go area. The army didn't really go past a certain area. And so there was no petrol bombs prepared. There was no acid bombs. Who would throw them anyway? And although the army said that they suffered acid bombs, there was no record of it anywhere. Curious. And there was no petrol bombs because, as Neil said earlier, there was a shoot-to-kill policy for anyone caught petrol bombing. Absolutely killed petrol bombing. Nobody petrol bombed anymore because they could be shot on sight. And the petrol bombing actually came back in again, properly in riots in Northern Ireland around 1981, 82 with the Brixton riots in England. And they were using petrol bombs against the police, and people in the north thought, right, if they're using them, we're using them. And that's when they came back into the forefront when there was riots in the north again. So again, these were just lies and just to make the Derry people look bad. And it worked. It's taken all this time for Derry to be able to hold its head high and say, actually, we were telling the truth all this time. And thanks to the elders who worked so hard to uncover all this, the world knows it now as well. And it's a great feeling that we're not fighting that losing battle all the time. And it took a lot of work and a lot of researchers and a lot of uncovered evidence, fascinating stuff, And even though I've just written a book about it, the amount that's in the book, you could have put 3-4 times more. And even now I'm kicking myself thinking, that's not in the book, that's not in the book. There's so much about Bloody Sunday. It's a fascinating case. And if you want to look it up, it's in the National Archives and you can look up everything. There's hundreds of eyewitness statements, soldiers, the high-up military, policemen, priests. Really, really interesting stuff. Another thing which was very arresting, I think, the day after Bloody Sunday, 7 priests held a press conference in Derry. The sight of 7 priests holding a press conference must have been really, shocking. But every one of them says, we're holding this press conference to tell you that it was absolute murder. And there's a front page of it in the Derry Journal, and you can see the 7 priests sitting there. And it's framed in the editor of the Journal's office still, It's a really important edition of the paper. Where am I? So, yep. So there was raids by association. If you were associated with Bloody Sunday, generally you were thought of as, a bad egg. Whenever I was growing up, we didn't really have so much of that anymore, but we still had the troubles, the end of the troubles to live through in the 90s. So Derry Girls, the way it portrays it, it's exactly what my life was like because I was at school at the exact same time. And you would get the day off school with a bomb scare, or I remember there was a soldier killed at the back of the school. and we all got the day off. And I remember we were all looking out the window, and you could see a big stain of blood on a wall. And we were all just staring at this stain of blood, and somebody had died. Isn't that a really weird memory? And I must have been about 16 or something when that happened. And again, it was kind of like, yeah, we got the day off school because someone was killed. So it was a strange, you think you didn't live through much of the Troubles until you tell wee stories like that, and you think, that's actually really weird and horrific. And so again, we were kept to ourselves and kept quite sheltered because of them things going on. You know, the army was on the streets, and I was only in a riot once because we weren't allowed to go to things like that. And my mummy and daddy went on their first holiday in 30 years, and we went out, me and my 4 brothers went out up the town for a night out, and there was a massive riot, and we were caught in the middle of it, and it was awful, and we got in so much bother, and we were probably in our 20s then, but the fear, and that was my only riot, and it was terrifying. And I remember like a big massive brick, and there was lumps of blood, like congealed blood on the brick, and it was running down a waterway because it was raining, and you could see the blood running down the whole street of Waterloo Street. It was just really strange. Again, for young eyes, and sort of like things that I'll someday probably get a poem out of. So in terms of the families, nobody really thought about campaigning about Bloody Sunday because I think everyone was licking their wounds for years afterwards. And who would believe them anyway? And it wasn't until sort of the 1990s that they started seeing other miscarriages of justice being acknowledged, like the Birmingham 6 or the Guildford 4. I don't know if you've heard of those cases. And a friend of mine was one of the Maguire 7 who were arrested along with the Guildford 4 and put in jail for a bombing. So my friend Patrick Maguire was 14 and he was put in jail because they said he was a bomb maker. His mum was jailed for 12 years. And I know Annie Maguire too. And, you know, it affected their whole lives. And they were arrested along with Giuseppe Conlon, which if any of you have seen The Name of the Father, that's the family that Giuseppe was visiting whenever they were all arrested. So for me to be able to personally associate with that too, it's mad. It affected Patrick's whole life. So it wasn't until the families in Derry saw these great miscarriages of justice actually being acknowledged and overturned that they thought, whoa, we could do something about Bloody Sunday. And that sort of set the wheels in motion. And in the early 90s, they decided, right now is the time, we're going to try and they set up the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign in 1992. And it only lasted 6 years. So I think the world thinks, we were campaigning. It was a very concentrated campaign for 6 years. My auntie, they internationalised it. The reason it didn't go away is because the families just wouldn't give up. And I think maybe that's a difference why Bloody Sunday is still so prominent, is that you couldn't shut them up, you know. My Auntie Kay spoke at Capitol Hill on the Senate, in the room with senators, and she cried her way through it, and she made senators cry. And when I heard things like that when I was young, and she took a petition to 10 Downing Street with 40,000 signatures, and, you know, she gave it to the... Things like that when you're young and you're thinking, wow, my auntie just delivered a petition to 10 Downing Street. So it was almost like a fable kind of in our house. It wasn't until long after that I got involved. But I think the efforts of those early campaigners are unbelievable. And they had nothing. The first reporter, the first solicitor that was hired to work on the Bloody Sunday case was given a folder about that thick. And they were just all there. That's all we have so far on Bloody Sunday, a thin blue folder. And she just thought, well, we've got nothing. You know, they had to go back to the very beginning. And it turns out that a lot of the stuff was never disclosed at the time. There was reams of evidence. And some of the things they uncovered was like the Heath Widgery memo that was talked about a few times whenever it was written in the minutes, and that was discovered in the 90s, that the Prime Minister warned Widgery, we're fighting not only a military war, but a propaganda war, essentially. Make sure our soldiers look good at the end of this. Apart from that, there was also tailored soldier statements found, and you could directly tell, you know, that the statements had been doctored. There was a tailoring process in the soldier statements. So the 1972 ones were far more vivid and had far more information. And then The next one was a little bit lighter and a bit more. And then the next one was cleaned up more. And the next one was cleaned up. I think there was 3 or 4 sets of doctored statements. Again, very clearly the result of a tailoring process to control the narrative of what had happened. As well as that, you talked about the shot list that Mike Jackson wrote, General Jackson. That was the night of Bloody Sunday, and he wrote, gunman, in the 17, shot in the window. Bomber, 17, shot in the... And that was the lie. That was the first. Not one of the things on the shot list corresponded with a death. That's what Neil says as well. He said he didn't write the list. He said, it's not. In the new inquiry, Jackson said, I didn't write the list. It wasn't me, Someone gave me the list. And then he was the only person recalled to the Bloody Sunday inquiry because a young soldier in England found the actual shot list handwritten in a photocopier in England. And he contacted the inquirer and was all, you might want this. And Jackson was recalled to the inquirer, and this is, clearly you wrote it, it's your handwriting. So that was kind of good for the families too, to be all, we got you. Not that not that anyone's ever been held accountable, but these small victories are maybe all we'll ever get. Also, in the Ballymurphy inquest, it transpired that who was in charge of the press of Ballymurphy? Jackson as well. The same fella, General Jackson. Well, he wasn't a general then, he was a colonel or something, but he was in charge of press, and he put out an IRA gun battle in Ballymurphy, and 11 people were killed, and he done the shot list in the press after Bloody Sunday too. So clearly he was just, he was the army's lying machine. Again, he became Britain's #1 soldier, the top dog in all the army, the commander of land forces. So he went up to the highest of the army and never ever accounted or even answered for anything that he'd done in the 70s or beyond. So this is probably very convoluted, but there's so much about Bloody Sunday. I really don't know where to start when you come to talks like this, so I try and keep it more of what we experienced. So the new evidence was unbelievable in the 90s, and it really, they had so much, they had to address Bloody Sunday. And as part of the peace process, it was kind of like an unspoken thing. Do something about Bloody Sunday and we'll talk about peace. And so when Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, announced the second inquiry, it was a real big deal for the families, The inquiry took them to London. The soldiers wouldn't give evidence in Derry because they thought their lives were under threat. No, they weren't. And they wouldn't come back either for the new court case because their lives are still under threat, which they're not. It's very convenient for them to say this. But they had to relocate their whole lives, the families, to London for a year for the military evidence. And I got to go over to a lot of that too. Fascinating. And Soldier F, the one soldier who we almost got for a prosecution, but that fell apart too. One of the families, John Kelly, Soldier F, killed his brother. And he was keeping a tally chart at the inquiry. 500 times, over 500 times. Soldier F said, I do not remember, I do not recall, I have no recollection of shooting 5 men and wounding another 6. It really stinks. Stinks to high heaven. So it just shows you that they were never going to tell the truth, ever. So where are we now? We haven't really... We've come so far in terms of the world knowing what really happened and the world knowing that Derry told the truth, which is all the Derry wanted, really. And we got an apology, which was something we never ever thought we would get. And it was fantastic on the day when we got an apology from the British Prime Minister. You could really feel the weight lifting off the city. But with an apology, if our people are innocent, then somebody should be guilty. And that didn't follow through. And so the rule of law clearly does not still apply in the north because now Boris Johnson's government is trying to draw a line under all legacy cases. And no families will ever get inquests, investigations, police investigations. Bloody Sunday was never investigated by the police until about 5 years ago. No, never. That's crazy. So the prosecution cases have fallen apart, kind of, and it's with the High Court now to see if they will reconsider and look at the evidence again. But what are the chances after 50 years? Let's be realistic about it, all they can do is sort of hope that people will change their mind, and that I don't think anyone really wants to see us. Well, I know some of the older ones do, but no one's under any illusions that soldiers are going to spend a life in jail, But geez, give them a slap on the wrist or something, What have the British Army learned from this? Not very much, when they can go about and still do this, and they've never been properly reprimanded. They've never apologised. You know, Cameron apologised, but the British Army never have. So during the 50th commemorations recently, a few of the families called for that, for the British Army, for the parachute regiment, they apologised, which is a really strong line, I think, you know. And my Auntie Kay was on a few national news TV outlets, and she said she's calling on the soldier that killed my Uncle Jackie to come forward and tell her. Just say, it was me, I'm sorry, write us a letter. And I thought that was really powerful. She would forget about any prosecutions if she had some old man, who he probably is now, write her a letter saying, I'm sorry, it was me. And so hopefully, you never know, because it was on Sky News and all this, she said this, you never know. And I really thought, oh, please let the soldier have a conscience. And then my family would be able to go, right, we can rest a bit. And during the 50th commemorations recently, para flags were flying all around the city again. They do it every year, and the families don't really kick up a fuss anymore because it'll happen anyway. But for the 50th, there was a lot of press, and the press noticed, and it was everywhere, that brand new para flags were all over Derry, antagonising the families, you know, and it's just antagonising. And the parachute regiment came out on Twitter and said it was disgraceful and unacceptable to be flying para flags, get them down. And I was thinking, what? So it's disgraceful to fly flags, but not to shoot civilians in the back? You know, so I think it is actually something we could aim for, is to ask for an apology. You know, acknowledge it. Don't just depend on the Prime Minister apologising for you. It might go a long way. If we're not getting prosecutions, God knows what we'll get now. But, you know, acknowledge it. Say, yes, that was us, sorry about that. And then at least people can move on, because the people that are most affected now are pensioners. My Auntie Kay was 25 when this started. She's 75 now. She's a wee old lady. I had to walk around all these interviews, and it's just sad. And because of their efforts, they don't have to pass it on to us. You know, I'm doing this it's not a burden to me to do this, because they have sorted out all the big issues, thank God. Because I always said, if she gets too old to carry on, I would take over. And I didn't want to take over. I don't want to be fighting the government my whole life. But I do want them to actually just have a bit of respect for us. So we didn't get justice, but we got truth. And we did get a new inquiry. So we achieved 2 of the 3 campaign aims. There was 3, you know. We didn't get the prosecutions and the justice, and we never ever will, but at least everyone knows now that what really happened, and that matters more than anything else. So thank you very much. I don't know if that was any. Thanks. I only used 1 page of notes. I'm raging. I forgot about that whole page. Yeah. Yes. Yes, definitely would. And I think once the families came to America, there was great support from America, and support from the Irish government. Once they actually took notice, the Irish government were quite instrumental in putting pressure and trying to support the families and putting pressure on the government to do something. So I think if we tried to get that kind of support, even to call for an apology, something as simple as, but yes, I think international pressure would help. But who do you ask? You know, that's why I'm here. Yes. 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 Not only that, it's just another example of they don't give a about the North. They really, really don't. You know, the North majority voted Remain, and now we've been taken out of Europe against our will, and nobody cared. And now, if this protocol thing falls apart now, there could be a hard border, which will lead to another, you know, to more conflict, and nobody wants it. So I think the Brexit has actually backfired on them. We're closer now to talks of a united Ireland than we ever were, and it's an accident, you know. So I think it's just another example of them disrespecting what people want. Mm. Let me see. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. No, I'm all right. I wanted to praise Eamon McCann, who you all saw earlier. It's because of Eamon McCann that I got into all this work. And he contacted me in like 2008 or something and just said, would you like to join the Bloody Sunday Trust? And I was so honoured. And I thought, yes, I would like to do anything to help. And because of him inviting me to do that, and the same thing then, he said, would you help me and be the press officer for the families for the report of the Bloody Sunday inquiry? Yes. And I was a news reporter at the time and I was on maternity leave. And I went to my editor and said, could I be the press officer for the Bloody Sunday families for the report? And my editor was all, go, just go, do it. Because that was a hotline for them, all the interesting stuff. So it's all because of Eamon McCann and a random phone call when I needed help. So God bless him for that. And he's the finest speaker on Bloody Sunday ever. And I listen with rapt attention when he speaks. He's brilliant, and I hope he's writing his memoirs. So another thing I should mention as well, Soldier F. I know he's just an example case. He was mentioned in Parliament in October time whenever the prosecution case fell apart. Our local representative mentioned him in the House of Commons, so now he's on the official record. His full name is on the Hansard record in Parliament, and he was named last week in the Irish Parliament in the Dáil by, again, just to put him on the official record. And in the Dáil, they says Britain has no control here. We can do what we like. So it's very interesting right now that because we're not getting prosecutions, people are being bolder, and they're naming a mass murderer who was being prosecuted for killing 2 people, but he actually killed 5 and wounded another 6. So if you're ever going to make an example of a soldier, he should have been the example that was made. And so I think it's really brave of the politicians now to be naming him on the record. We wouldn't do it. We've known the names in Derry for decades, but we wouldn't use them. Why would we? Why would we lower ourselves? But now, whenever we're getting shafted from on high, why wouldn't the representatives use them and try and push it forward in that way? So it's interesting, and it's not over yet in that respect. And I really hope my Auntie Kay gets a letter from a soldier someday. It would be really important. Yep. Wouldn't that be brilliant, though, if everybody combined forces to do that? The only kind of thing I can sort of, it's not even a proper museum yet, it's a virtual idea, it's a concept, but there's a Museum of British Colonialism, and we brought them to the museum. When I worked in the museum, we brought them for a talk, and it was fascinating, and they're trying to draw those parallels from all different colonial groups who have suffered and try and highlight it and to document it, more importantly. So there's a documented cases of it, which would be a museum of sorts, but it's still only a concept as yet. But it was fascinating talk. Oh, I dare say there's many similarities, but I wouldn't be an expert on the hunger strikes, so don't ask me. But I do think that the swathes of people who joined, who took up arms after Bloody Sunday, sure, that's all led into it too, So yes, I think it's definitely connected. But again, I don't know enough about the hunger strikes to give you a firm example. Again, we were very sheltered from things. I didn't even know about the hunger strikes until I was like 30, and then thinking, wow, people, it's crazy, crazy. Mm. 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 Yep. Mm. Mm. I think it's watered down whatever we've been given, because a lot of the families sheltered their children. I dare say some might have took up arms. I wouldn't be able to say that on the record, but most families absolutely just became insular and protected their children. And so I think a lot of, at my talk in New York the other night, there was another Bloody Sunday relative, and he totally agreed that he was sheltered from everything. They were told on a need-to-know basis. I was told my Uncle Jackie went on a peace march and was shot by soldiers. That's it. Very, very basic for a 10-year-old. And we were only told it because that footage of him being carried, the colour BBC footage, was everywhere. And every time it was on the news, my mum would get upset. So we were spoon-fed it almost. So I think we've been fed a watered-down kind of version, and unless you were really, really into it, like I would be, that you would know some more details. I don't think there's that much interest in the second generation as there should be, maybe. And there's only pockets of people who would be interested, so I find it really difficult to find someone else my age who would stand up alongside me and talk about Bloody Sunday, because we were all sort of told not to talk about it, While it wasn't a secret in our house, we always knew about my Uncle Jackie, the boxing champion, and he was fun, and all the girls loved him, and but we didn't really delve any further into that. So, I think we're, but there's no bitterness either in the second generation. I think maybe, and there would be a lot of bitterness, and I dare say maybe hatred of the army or whatever. Whereas we don't hate anybody, kind of. Why would we? We've disrespect for them and dismay, but no hate as such in our hearts. So I think any of the elders, they probably have this thing that somebody killed my brother, I hate him, and I'm glad we don't have that. Mm. And so you're talking about the second generation and the generation of what would you hope that gets passed on, what memories continue, how do you hope that at 75 years, right, when we're hopefully having the 75th symposium, how would you want that to look, or what would you hope that the next generation holds on to, and what do we let go? Hopefully by then we will have an apology from the army or something, and there'll be something else. But hopefully by then as well, it won't be such a raw wound in Derry, and it is still a raw wound. The families are still, you'd think it was yesterday the way some of them are upset, because it is always in their face, and especially during the 50th, there was press from all over the world there, and they didn't even have time to think about what they were commemorating, because they were snowed under with interviews. In hindsight, that was really bad. You should have left the families alone for that weekend. And if I had been in charge of the press, I would have made sure of that, but I wasn't. But I would like to think that it's more about commemorating, but in a positive way. Look what our people achieved. Look how far we've come. About the perseverance. About how important it is to persevere if you really believe in a cause, even if that's all passes down. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and it's really hard to try and explain my work to her in a way that wouldn't make her kind of, bitter or something, So I tell it to her in a kind of like a people power kind of way. Stand up for yourself. If you want something, you fight for it. If people aren't listening to you, you make them listen. And if that's the lesson that's passed down, that would be brilliant, wouldn't it? Just to stand up for yourself and not take it lying down. Did that answer it? Yeah. Anybody else? Hey. Very few, I would think, and again, pockets of it. The people who are putting up the para flags, they're not representative of the Protestant or Unionist community. It's a pocket of troublemakers, and the same people who wouldn't really have agreed with the Saville report. It would be a pocket of people. It wouldn't be an entire community. I think it was widely accepted that it was true and accurate, and that we were telling the truth all the time, and like. My baby's daddy, he would be from the Protestant community, and he even thought it was a gun battle with the IRA, and it wasn't until I brought him up to the Saville report on that day, and he was up to Derry Walls, and he was crying with everybody else, with all my brothers, and he realised the significance of the moment, but he was told, and he believed the lie that his community sort of perpetrated was that it was an IRA gun battle. So even that was an eye-opener for him as a 30-odd-year-old man to be all, whoa, my family were wrong about it too. So it is still there, and it's still there today too with the para flag hanging and all. Not everybody believes it, and a lot of people think the army came in and done a good job. But I think the majority are quite happy with the Saville report and quite happy with what we got. What was the second bit there? It's kind of hard going sometimes, I find, especially in the work that I do. I write a lot of heavy, serious stories, but when there's serious stuff, there's always light stuff too, and there's always amazing Derry humour that comes through. And even in the Bloody Sunday book, there's some really funny bits in it, and it's random to say that, but there's a dark humour that carries people through things as well, And I think that has absolutely saved lives in Ireland. The fact that we can laugh at ourselves and we can still make a joke even in the face of great adversity. So I think I just go into interviews cautiously, and I never want to annoy anybody, and I mostly let them do the talking. And once someone starts talking, they just talk. There's very little interviewing goes on whenever someone's on a roll. You just let them talk, and you don't sort of break their flow. And you were just reminding me of a funny story there. Margot was talking about Wellington Street in the Bogside, which is gone now, and a lot of the civil rights leaders originally came from Wellington Street. And my friend Dermy, as he would call himself, a street radical. That's what he says, we were street radicals. And Dermy's house would have been the house where they would have squatted family. He had a big list of empty houses in Derry, and if there was a family that needed housing, he would squat them into this house. And he was telling a story about this lovely house, a family really needed it. We went over and we got them settled, and we changed the locks and got them all settled. And then later on that night, there was a knock on his door, and it was John Hume, the Nobel Prize winner, and his wife, Pat. And John Hume said, Dermy, did you squat a house in the waterside today? And Dermy said, it was a great house. The family are delighted. They're really pleased. They have a roof over their heads and all. And John Hume said, that was Pat's daddy's house. We only moved him out to do the wallpapering. Some great humour, So I kind of love that. I love the fact that oral history as well, it doesn't just take down the serious stuff, it actually captures the community essence of people and all. And I really love that. Is that us? Anybody else? Thank you so much for today. It was really good.